Okay, I want to talk about how to cut the cope and stick joint on the shaper. Now, what you're looking at here is a sample cope and stick. This is the rail. The rails get coped and sticked. A style will simply get sticked. A cope and stick joint is designed to have one part, there's the coping, fit over the sticking. To ideally create a nice looking joint. Okay, let's take a look at what each of these heads does. This is the coping head. The smallest cutter, as I said, is in the middle. And we use the coping head to scoop out and leave the tenon. It scoops out the inside, or the outsides rather, and leaves the tenon projecting in the middle. The coping, or sticking head, cuts the groove and profiles it. Once again, rails are coped and sticked. Stiles are just sticked. Okay, the first thing we need to do is set up the sticking head. Now we're going to use the small Delta shaper for this. And when running cope and stick, you really do need to have two shapers to make it run efficiently. Now, when we are doing sticking, we are doing the entire face or entire edge of the board. So therefore we have to have an offset fence. These fences are already set up that way, and this fence is about a 32nd of an inch back. Now, when running cope and stick, you always want to reference off the face of the board, the face. So that means you want to put your cutters on upside down. So I'm going to go ahead and mount this set. In this order. And on a cope and stick set, this point here is lined up with the innermost point of the top cutter as well. Now just to emphasize the point, it's just making a little contact here. So the outfeed fence is set to making a little bit of contact with that most smallest diameter on the sticking head. And the fence is set back about a 32nd of an inch. So I'm going to go ahead and run a sample on this test piece. And that looks pretty good. We want this flat here to be like a heavy 1/16 of an inch. So if the fence was set incorrectly, there would have been a snipe on the end. This is nice and straight. That's good. You have to make sure there is no snipe, or it will throw off the joint when you put it together. Another thing, when milling up your pieces, these were left intentionally wide. So if you ran a piece and you had some tear out, just run it again. It's like running it on a joiner. You can run it a couple of times each time it cuts a new surface. That can be particularly helpful in the groove here, where you often get a lot of chip out. So run it once, then run it a second time. You'll probably have a much cleaner groove. Next, I want to talk about setting up the coping head. When we go to cope a piece, we're going to clamp it in a fixture. And we're going to ride that whole fixture against the fence. So although we are shaping the entire end of the piece, because we're not doing the entire edge of the sled, the fences need to be in line. So I'm going to go ahead and install these components. I want to show you something as I do. I'm going to put a couple spacers on here, small diameter ones, so I can use my sled without bumping into it. Here's the first part of the head. Second part. Now what I want to show you is these two pieces. These are spacers. We have two spacers here, and dropping these on actually thickens up the tenon a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and put our top cutter on. Always want to make sure you have your spindle unlocked. Now on this sled, you notice this back piece, this is screwed on just to act as a chip breaker for when these pieces go off the edge. So to install it, I take my piece, I make sure my fixture's tight to the fence, slide my rail in, and clip it down. Having that piece of oak there helps minimize tear out on the back corner as the cutter exits. It's always a good idea to clean up your joint. There's often a little bit of fuzz from the cutting process. So when I fit this in, I have a little bit of a lip here, probably at the 32nd of an inch. So to fix that, I'm going to have to raise my cutter up and then do another practice pass. See, we're getting this little bit of blowout here. That is exactly why we cope first before we stick. When this is sticked, it'll take that piece off. Now these guys are dead flush. Right on flush, which is exactly what we're shooting for. A couple of things to remember when cutting the cope and stick joint. Stiles can be left long and wide. Keeping them long lets you accommodate for any kind of snipe should you get it, and leaving it wide lets you rerun the piece should the edge have chip out. Rails can be left wide for the same reason. You get chip out, you just run it again, but because the ends are getting coped, they must be cut to length. Now let's talk about the steps we're going to follow when we actually do our door. Because of that blowout factor which we discussed earlier, the first thing we're going to do is cope the end of the rails. Afterwards, we're going to stick the inside edge of the rails and the stiles. And once again, if we have any blowout because our pieces are wide, we can rerun them again. Then we're going to cut the stiles to finished length and width. And we're going to cut the rails to final width. Then we're going to dry fit our whole door and see if we have it together. But for right now, let's start with coping the ends of the rails. Whenever you're running anything, you want to reference off of the face. If there's any irregularities in the wood, that way the irregularities will be transferred to the back and still be flush in the front. So anyways, mark your pieces and remember, face down always. Now that we have both ends of our rails coped, we'll stick the rails and stiles. And when I run this through, when I push it through, I have my push stick here. I want to make sure that I'm never pushing directly into the opening, because that could lead to a snipe. Once I get over here, I want the pressure on the out feet fence. Now I've gone ahead, and I can't emphasize the importance of this. At this point, I have gone and ripped my stiles to width, cut them to proper length, ripped my rails to proper width, and now it's time to put them together. You need to remember to resize them, or if you make your door based on that, oversized, it's going to be a problem. So let's just see how this all goes together. All right, there we go. There's our door.